24 says that God is spirit and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. That means worshiping with your spirit truthfully and being truthful when you worship. Now, a word that sticks out to me in that is the word must. You know, it doesn't say you can worship him in spirit and in truth if you feel like it, or, you know, if things are just going, like, terrible for you. No, he says you must worship. That means when you worship, you must worship in spirit and in truth. Okay, so what is worship? Worship is talking and communicating to God. It's pouring your heart out and being real with him. It can also be singing worship songs and talking to God and just asking him different questions. A good example of this is David. David is a good example of this. You know, a lot in the Bible, especially Psalms, I believe it is, you know, David gets really real with God. You know, he is praising one minute, and then on his face in tears and angry at God the next minute. You know, he was real with God, and because he was real with God, he got a lot of breakthrough, and he got, you know, God helped him through his troubled times, and helped him through what he was going through. So many times in the Bible, worship is mentioned, and a lot of time, major breakthrough happened. Like in Acts 16:25-27. It says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. You know, in Paul and Silas' situation, they could have complained. They could have, whined. They could have been like, you know, oh my goodness, things aren't going to change, blah, 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 and just really negative about the situation. But instead of being negative, they decided to, you know, praise God. They decided to look at the situation through their spiritual eyes, not their physical eyes. Because we can look at our situations in life, and they can seem really terrible and really hard. But when you look at them with your spiritual eyes and with God's eyes, you know that he's already been through that situation. He's waiting for you on the other side. And he's waiting for you to call out to him and ask him to help you through it. Because he will. All you have to do is ask and let him. In 1 Samuel 31-6, it talks about David again. And him and his men had gotten back from a battle. And when they got back to their homes were destroyed, their families were taken, and, you know, that was a difficult situation. And then, when they found out that, you know, everything was ruined and their families were taken, they all got mad at David, and they all blamed David for it. And, you know, again in that situation, David, he didn't complain. You know, he wasn't overly worried. I'm sure he was worried some, but he wasn't overly worried. Instead, he went to God. And he's like, okay, God, this is what happened. You know, everyone's mad at me. You know, basically help. And God did. And they ended up getting their families back and everything. When we worship, the focus shouldn't be on ourselves. You know, we shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, I'm going to worship this way because it makes me look good. You know, it doesn't matter what you look like when you worship, and it shouldn't matter. And when we worship, the focus should be on God. Like in Luke 18:9-14, it says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his chest and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. You know, this tax collector is a good example of how we should be when we worship. We should be humble and real before God. You know, the tax collector, he wanted to be real with God. He's like, God, I know this happened, and, you know, I do all these things, and I'm sorry, you know. He wasn't prideful. He was humble. When we're humble in our worship, you know, a change happens in our heart, and that change can only happen with God. God's the only one who can make that change. We went to, a group from my youth group, went to Winter Ramp in December, and Winter Ramp is like a youth conference, and a conference, it's 3 days, something like that. But it's really cool. And, you know, we had been, like, it was a long trip down, and I was just, like, really tired. And by the second day, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm tired, I'm sore, I want to go back to the hotel and sleep. But then Karen Leeton, who is the founder of the ramp and stuff like that, she said, basically what she said that stuck out to me was, just because you don't feel something when you worship, doesn't mean nothing's happening. You know, worship isn't about a feeling, it's about the result. You know, I pressed through that weekend, and I worshiped, and I prayed, and I praised. And on the way home, by the end of it, I was like I felt that change in my heart. I was like, oh my goodness, I just want to worship you, Jesus. Like, this is amazing. So I encourage you guys to worship humbly and to be real with God.